Once in a month, we publish an episode in English. Sometimes it happens, as with the episode today, that I bump into the work of a person that I would like to meet. To do an interview for a podcast is a nice excuse to get to know the person. In the next episodes in English, I am planning a series on design that happens in the public sector in Finland. Guess why? I work in Finland for a ministry as a service designer. I am very curious about the work of my colleagues in other organizations here, and as I have been collaborating for years with them and witnessed their evolution, I would like to give more visibility to their work. And always learned in the dialogue with others. Now let's go to today's guest. Jonathan Ventura is an Israeli design professor and researcher that has founded the Social Design Network. As this podcast is the only one on social design, we wanted to interview a person interested in creating a network around the topic. We talk in this interview about social interventions, research projects on urban design, and design in emergency situations. My name is Mariana Salgado. This is Diseño y Diáspora.
Thank you, Mariana, and hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Ventura. I'm a professor of design research. I have various positions now, but my main job is that I'm the director of theory at Shenkar College, Israel. Apart from that, I work in various venues. One of the key things I do, in which we'll elaborate later on, is that I co-founded and I co-direct the Social Design Network. And I worked part-time in a transportation design studio also in Israel.
So let's start with the Social Design Network. What do they do there? What do you do?
Okay, so we founded the network around 3.5 years ago. And again, it's me plus a colleague whose name is Dr. Bori Feher from Moholy-Nagy University in Budapest. And what we do is we focus on three main venues. The first one is education. So we think about how to teach and integrate social design. The second one is in practice, that we do projects dealing with social design. And the third one is research. So part of our activities is research, and we do events. We have every year 2 in-situ events. This year we're going to have a small event in Berlin in May, and a very, very big event in October that will be open for everyone.
What is this new big event in?
Yeah, so this event is, it's not like a classic academic event. It will be held for 3 days in Budapest. First day would be kind of a classic conference in which people will present their jobs or their research on social design. Then we're going to have some workshops. And the third day, which is for me the most interesting part, would be that we work live with communities around Budapest. And again, if you want to hear more about it, you can just check it out on Google or LinkedIn or on our website.
But I have you here, so I'm going to still ask you. So what's the idea to work with the communities on Budapest? It's like you are going to have some kind of design exercises or...
Yeah, we'll have some collaborations, because again, it's very limited in time and location, but it's going to be a bit like social interventions, but very, very specific. And the rest will be small workshops and lectures and meeting people. Plus, we'll have some really interesting keynote speakers, which is a secret now because it's not finalized, but a lot of interesting people will be there. Yes.
Perfect. And tell me, and where is the funding for these projects and this research coming from?
Yeah, that's a very tough and a bit under the belt question, because we started with no funding at all, so everyone is doing it pro bono, and that's why we started to base the network on people from academia, like researchers. So they have their salaries from their institutions, but they do all the work for free, and also obviously me and my co-director. And 2 months ago, we got a grant from the European Union for 250,000 euros, in which we're going to do some work regarding devising and designing a blueprint for how should designers and specifically academics work with NGOs on social design. So that's the first time we actually get funding, but hopefully we'll get more. Yes, but mainly we do it for free.
Wow, super interesting. And the projects are also done mainly with academic staff.
Yeah. So we have currently in the network, we have a lot of partners. We started with Europe because it was easier for us, since it's not funded, for people to fund themselves venues like Erasmus Plus. So we started with UDK from Berlin, Elisava from Barcelona, Politecnico of Torino, UDK in Berlin. We have Estonia, and then we added NID from India and a university from Istanbul. But mainly, again, it's part European, but obviously we know that since it's called Social Design Network, that we need to bring partners from outside Europe, obviously. So we're going to expand, but it's taking a bit time.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, because you are Israeli, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you work in social design. So Israel is a country that has been having a very aggressive politics towards Palestine, no? One of your neighbors. So I guess that you have been doing some design interventions or experiments related to this. Do you want to tell us?
Yeah, so it's not an experiment, but during COVID, I've, as you know, in Israel, all of us have to work in the army, like the reserves. So fortunately for me, I've been working for the last 10 years in a part of the military that deals with civil support. And for almost 2 years, I worked with Eastern Jerusalem Palestinians with COVID. So what we did was we invented a model of kind of identifying key people in each of the 10 neighborhoods in Eastern Jerusalem. And then obviously we got funding from the government, but we opened up small intervention teams that were located in each of these neighborhoods, and they worked with, we devised specific roles. For example, one of them worked with volunteers, one worked with emergency services, one worked with NGOs, bringing food or medicine for people that lacked funding.
But this is work that you do as a professor, as a design professor.
I did it again. It was volunteering, so I put aside all my work, and for almost 2 years, that was what I did. I used some methods. Mainly, again, the design wasn't good at all, but it wasn't the issue. The issue was that we needed solutions very, very quickly. So mainly we use visual communication strategies, service design. We needed some knowledge of urban design, like GIS or urban planning, but again, very, very, very quickly. So we needed, products that didn't look good, but did their job, because people were dying. So we didn't have any option. But we had a lot of success. I mean, we started, as you know, Israel was one of the first countries to implement vaccination. And we had a lot of resistance in Eastern Jerusalem. So we started with 7% vaccination, and after 3 weeks, we got to 70% through a lot of community work and working with identifying key, personnel, which was very interesting because some of them were religious leaders, some could be high school teachers.
But what were these products?
So for example, and again, that's why I'm saying service design or visual communication, because we had vaccinations and we had, if you remember, before vaccination, we needed people to conduct tests, right? Like CPR and stuff like that. So a lot of that was how to create information that people will believe that is true, and how to change mass behavior. So people didn't believe that COVID was a thing. And then people, again, amongst Eastern Jerusalem, COVID was, at the beginning, was thought of as a stigma. So even people that were infected didn't tell others because they suffered from stigma, and then they infected their families. So there were a lot of issues regarding information and how to trigger, different behaviors. So a lot of that was creating teams and services and a lot of videos and using social media and digital posters. And afterwards, we had to implement these teams like physically in location. So we needed to work with a lot of NGOs and emergency services. So a lot of coordination and information management and stuff like that.
So you worked as a designer on that.
I worked as mainly as something that is called, I think you would call it some sort of community psychology officer, something like that, because I needed to understand people's behavior and implement solutions. So I wasn't hired as a designer, but more as a person that knows about design. and then again, since my education was in design research, then I know not everything, obviously, but I know a lot about urban design, industrial design, and visual communication, which I worked in various venues.
I didn't ask you, what did you study?
Yeah, so I studied the design anthropology as a PhD, and the focus of that was social design. But part of my studies were in industrial design, but I'm not an industrial designer. So I work with different teams in different venues because I understand, as I said, urban design, visual communication, and industrial design. So mainly design research.
And you also do this type of social design work together with the students? This type of social interventions, I mean.
Yeah, for sure. So if we go back to what we kind of skipped that, but one of the toughest things for us is to actually define what social design is, right? Because it has been going around, but nobody actually knows specifically what it is. But for us, it's design for nonprofit. So we do actual work also with the students, but the main issue is not that we have a client that needs to translate it, these kind of outputs into profit, but more to create change or influence or outcomes that really matter and that communities really need. So in some cases, we can opt for what's called non-design. So if I work with a community and they have a solution which works, but doesn't look very good, then I'm fine with it, right? I mean, I won't pour in a lot of money.
But why would you say that this is non-design? Because it does not look good. I think for me it's very weird that you also mentioned that before when you were talking about the solutions for the COVID crisis, that if it is working and is a solution, why does it need to look good for being designed?
Yeah, for sure. I'm saying that there's a difference because in COVID, we did design, but it wasn't aesthetic. I mean, because if a designer were to judge it, by design standards, it wouldn't get a high score. But what I'm saying now is that in some cases, when you work with the communities, I'm calling it non-design because what they do is good enough. So I won't come over and say, okay, let's pour a lot of money to introduce something that looks better but does the same thing. So I would say just keep it. I mean, then it's okay. And we'll give you perhaps advice, but there's no need to do, something new from scratch.
But a lot of others would call that design, right?
Yeah, I guess for social designers, that's because we do all the research and we talk to people for sure. But we don't, move to a whole new stage of the design process if there's no need for it.
Okay, perfect. And you recently wrote a book it's an introduction of design theory. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the book. And how do you think that design theory has been evolving, or what is new in the area?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So first of all, the book, again, I'm not a good judge because I think it's a good book, but we kind of designed the book to be readable. I mean, it's not Harry Potter, obviously, but it's not like hard, like, mind-blowing stuff. It's fairly easy to read. And it presents some key issues, starting with design and gender, design and violence. There's a chapter on ideology, politics, ideology, and design as language, for example. What's new about design theory? It's very interesting because it started with, everyone knows design thinking, but it's not design thinking. Design thinking is very oriented towards marketing and stuff like that. But I think a main shift was when design theory started from the industry. But now it's very much towards critical thinking, social sciences. There's a bit of philosophy there because, again, we're dealing with ideology and values. Because as we can see, throughout Europe and some other countries in the world with populist regimes, there's a lot of problems. Let's say that very gently. So we try to urge designers to be more critical thinking and to reflect upon their own work and their values.
And do you present some tools to be more critical?
Yeah, for sure. So again, for example, if we take gender, obviously, I guess all of you know the term pink washing, right? So we present some projects that look a bit silly, but it's still going on now. So if you have a toothbrush, you paint it pink and you add 20% of the price because it's kind of gender oriented, but it's total BS because it's not. There's no research and there's no actual design for gender, right? It's only the color. So in some cases, when you deal with ethics, then the first stage is that you have to be a good designer, and the good designers need to consider the users in a more in a deeper way, in a more critical fashion.
So you kind of present different examples and you criticize them. This is how you go about.
Not in every chapter. For example, the chapter on design language, which I really like, deals with some aspects that seem obvious for designers, but the moment that you add theory, they understand how complex it is. Because, for example, I bet that every visual communication designer or UX designer know about language through colors and grid and stuff like that. But urban planners and architects are less inclined to use these kind of methods. So what we present is relevant for all venues of design, which I think is very important. Plus, it's not detached from practice. It's always practice oriented. So we always present some theory, but it has some very, very easy to use applications.
Okay. So the idea is that the book is like a kind of manual for students.
I think it starts with students, but I think it would be relevant for every practitioner as well. Even, hardcore designers that work, in the field for years will find interesting insights there. I'm pretty sure. That was our first intention. As you work with academic press, then they lead you towards, some sort of audience, but I think we broaden up the scale. And it's relevant for almost everyone that deals with not only design, but in material culture or visual culture as well.
This interview is part of the list Israel y Diseño, Arquitectura para el Cambio e Investigación y Diseño. List can be found in Spotify and in our website in the recommended section. In these interviews, I like to go from the concrete interventions to the values, concepts, and frameworks. This is why I always ask for concrete examples. These concrete examples for designers are crucial. They are the boundary objects, the implementation of our ideas. As my colleague Ricardo said, through changing the how, we can intervene the what, define what we do. We are specialists in implementing and really making change. Yes, we need to understand and explain what we do, but still making it is in the core of our skills. In many interviews, I feel stupid asking again and again about, but concretely, what have you done? But this is the one question that my listeners have mostly appreciated. They are waiting for that. Coming back to the outcome to be able to fly again, to return to the roots in order to continue talking about the leaves. Let's listen more to Jonathan that has a lot to tell us. I thought that you have a project on urban social design with a focus on care and responsibility. This is one of the projects in your social design network. Could you like to tell a little bit more about that? Because as I understood, this is something that is starting, right?
Yes. So currently we have three ongoing projects again, which are very at the beginning stages. As I mentioned before, we have funding for a project that will create a blueprint solution for working with NGOs. The focus is how to actually create a difference in local communities. So plus there's another smaller one that deals with, as you said, urban design projects and how to implement them in different communities around the world. So as you know, obviously from, let's say, Barcelona, when you have the Superblock project or other similar projects, then we try to see what worked in these kind of approaches or strategies and how we bring them over to different countries and what will be the differences. So for example, since Barcelona was designed in a specific way, and let's say Budapest or Tel Aviv are very different in their architecture and in their urban landscape, then we need to reflect upon what worked and what parts of this strategy should be a bit different.
So the idea is to scale up projects or to replicate projects that have been working in some country in others.
Yes, specifically in this project, but in other projects, let's say, again, we had a different one on refugees. So in that project, we worked with students in 3 countries, again, in Tel Aviv, but Estonia and Budapest. And we thought about how these countries work with, or what are the difficulties that governments present to refugees? How can we change this, or how can we address these difficulties? And specifically, we worked with children of refugees. So you add another layer of difficulty, since it's what we call in Israel the second generation. So you have children that were born in Israel, but they lack any status because the government, again, we have a very difficult approach from the government towards refugees. And again, I bet it could be similar in other countries in Europe, but it's different because these children speak the language of this country and they consider themselves, at least in part, local, but the government treats them in a very unfair manner. So that was one of the key reasons.
In which way the government is treating them in an unfair manner?
Well, the first thing is that they can be deported whenever the government changes their mind, which is horrible. They lack the privileges that people with a classic ID will get. But again, you can see the same approach towards other social groups.
Sorry, but if they are refugees, so if they have already the status of refugees, they are not going to be deported.
Yeah, but in some cases they don't have the status of refugees because to attain,
they are asylum seekers. You mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of gray areas in your definitions. It's very inhumane, but yeah, you know how it works. So government see you as a number or as a criteria case or something like that. And there's a lot of cracks in the system. But in the bottom line, there's a small kid that knows nothing about politics, which will be deported, and in some cases even without his parents, which is, again, horrible. So that was a part of our involvement in these kind of projects.
And don't you think that there is also some prejudices about how the government see the cases?
Yeah, for sure. But again, as I mentioned, and as you know, in urban design theory, there's a lot of treatment, let's say, for even the term, the right to the city, you know, it's a very famous term. So who will get the rights of the others? So it starts with refugees, but it goes to, let's say, gay communities or other marginalized communities throughout Europe. Again, and you can see that in Russia or in other countries. So the moment you start treating different social groups differently, then it's a very slippery slope. In most cases, it doesn't end well for anyone.
Well, in fact, so different social groups, they need different services, right?
Yeah, in a way. But again, I think for me, and for the network, the main issue is that designers and architects don't have the privilege to say that's not our job. Because let's say again in Qatar, we saw that thousands of workers died in building the stadiums and architecture, and very famously, Zaha Hadid also said, "It's not my job. They died. It's very sad, but it's not my job as an architect." So we say that's wrong. Designers and architects have responsibility towards their communities. And that's why they need to take responsibility and deal with matters that are crucial for everyone. For example, ideology and values. So when we design projects and when we actually practice social design, we start by values and not by a classical brief. So we call designers to say, okay, what are your values? What's guiding you in your work? You're not a carpenter. And again, I love carpenters. But designers and architects have the ability to influence a lot of people through their services. So we need more social involvement on the side of designers and architects. That's very important.
Yeah, and to better understand the impact of the things that we are doing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And just consider, for example, I mean, you're situated in Finland, which is one of the leading countries, as other countries in Scandinavia in social involvement and in other venues, but let's say in Spain or Italy or Israel, it's very different. I mean, the very role of designers is considered as a work.
Well, in Finland, we have a big network of designers working in the public sector, service designers and strategic designers. So in that sense, this is very particular. And there is a lot of possibilities of doing good through that work, no? In the cases that we have the opportunity in our own organizations.
Yeah, exactly. So again, doing good is a crucial part of social design, but it's a bit general. So that's why we started with, okay, you do good, but not for money, and you do something that people really need, and not something that you as a designer think they need. Right? So that there's no ego involved.
Yeah. But when you work in the public sector, it's not that you are working for the non-profit. And in my way of seeing social design, definitely designers working in the public sector, they are also doing social design.
Yeah, for sure. For example, again, I worked, I used to teach architecture students in Israel, and some of them didn't even know that there's a possibility for architects to work. We actually have a very interesting position that's called a community architect. So you work in a local government, but you're situated in a specific government and you work for the community. So their other teachers only taught them that their goal should be, to design for the rich and private sector, but they didn't even know that there's another possibility. So part of social design is that we want to say to designers, making a lot of money, that's great, but it's one option. Another option is, as you said, is working for the government or for, other sectors.
For the third sector. Yes, but these community architects, for example, is it part of the city architects, but is not working in the city office, but in the communities? Did I understood it right? But it's receiving a salary from the city.
Exactly, but they're responsible, for example, for community involvement. So if there is no projects, they are the one to talk to the communities and see if the projects are designed in a good way, if they need to conduct changes.
So they run participatory design and consultations with different communities.
Exactly. And the college didn't even present this kind of option.
Great. So, in the future, how do you see the social design field evolving?
Wow, that's a very, very interesting question. I wish I had the foresight to know what will happen in the next years, but...
How do you want that to be?
Yeah, I know I can answer with my fantasy. So I believe that currently social design is at the very margin. So if you take design as a whole, then it's only a few percentage of the whole pie. But actually, I think that the whole AI revolution, I think it's very good for us because all the technical stuff will be conducted automatically, which will leave a lot of time for designers to do other stuff. So I believe personally that we still have around 10 or 15 years till AI will be able to conduct, design research. But I think social design is a venue that is unreplaceable by other means, because we actually have the tools to understand what people want and what are their constraints and conflicts. So I believe that social design will have to grow. And again, one of the key changes was that during COVID, if you remember, the main event of the design world, which is the Design Week in Milan, was canceled twice, and the world didn't end. So people kind of started thinking, okay, so perhaps it's not that important. Perhaps we need something else. So I believe it will grow. I hope so. Yeah.
Well, and also the interesting design, in my opinion, project that had a lot of more visibility were like the network of Fab Labs, no? That they were able to provide masks and different gadgets and products that the hospitals were lacking.
Exactly. But again, the agencies that were at the center of the effort weren't, not industry and not government, but actual people. So either, like design labs like MIT and other design labs, but actually people with knowledge, which, presented their ideas, and it worked.
Yeah, but there is nothing wrong about that, right? Like
No, on the contrary, I think it's very good. Design is not originating, from one or two locations. It should be conducted all over the place.
So did I understood right that this volunteer group who with you were working and coordinating things during the early vaccination period in Israel, are they also nowadays working in Turkey and Syria?
Yeah, so again, as I mentioned, a part of the army is called social support or social services, and they have a team that is very well, they're very famous. It's a very small unit, but what they do is that they have engineers, architects, and doctors, and they fly over. They have the ability to arrive at any country in the world in less than 48 hours. So they come over. They have a lot of innovative ideas of how to rescue people from sites of earthquakes and natural disasters. They use robots and drones, and there's a lot of biomimicry objects that they designed by their own unit. So they know how to locate people by their cell phone or smartwatches or by hearing their sounds. They have dogs, so they have a lot of tactics of how to rescue people from disaster areas. And in the same time, they open up field hospitals, like small hospitals for people that they rescue. The current event in Turkey is so horrible because the scale is so big. So I know they rescued a few dozens of people, which is, it's not a lot. But in Israel, we say that every person that you save is like a whole world. So even that is good.
So, and you are collaborating with this unit also still?
I personally, I just finished because I did it for 25 years. So because I'm old, 45, and in Israel, when you're 45, you retire from that. But they have other people to do that. But there is a specific role that is called, as I said, a psychology or social psychology. So when you go to a different country, I didn't do it personally, but a person like me will contact the community and learn about where people went. And if you're looking specifically for a person, then you can interrogate the neighbors and see if they're there. But again, Turkey is the disaster is so massive that these kind of tactics are irrelevant because the scale, it's just horrifying.
Yes, but with this type of groups, is it possible to collaborate from the university together with to do something in relation to with your students?
Yeah, for sure. I know that they work with the Red Cross in many cases and with local communities. So since they're sent by the government because they're a top tier unit. So it's like if the government decides that we do this intervention because they need a plane, they have their own plane. It's a lot of effort. That's what I'm saying. So I'm just saying that designers have a role in these kind of actions. So, and specifically if you work in social design, then you know how to address communities, what questions you should ask. And usually in earthquake areas, you do a 3D model right? So, because the buildings have a specific tendency to collapse in a certain way. And when you see a collapsed building, you kind of know where the people will be. So there's obviously a lot of, physics, but that's the role of engineers. But designers know how to address people and how to translate the data that they gathered into models or tactics for rescue or after. I mean, after you rescue people, that's when the second part of the job starts, because you have trauma, you have a lot of resilience issues. So afterwards, you still keep working with communities.
So, what inspires you at the moment? What are you reading?
First of all, I think, first of all, I recommend to all my students to read comics or graphic novels, which is a bit better because it involves a lot of methods that we use, from storytelling through, visual imagination of scenes.
And what is your favorite? What would you recommend?
Creators. First of all, I like Topi, Sergio Topi. Was amazing. I read a lot of European comics, and I know in Spain there's a lot of really, really good creators. I don't know if you know Paco Roca.
Yes.
And he deals a lot with document, like events that really happened, which is always interesting. But again, a part of my one side of my family was from France, so from French people, comics are a big deal. Obviously, podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts in Hebrew and in English.
Which ones?
I think, first of all, I know that your podcast is very interesting and successful. I think there's not many, specifically on design, but there are, the BBC has a good one. There's one on the Smithsonian. I like a lot of them. Actually, there is one which I really like, which it's called Design Matters. There is, stuff you should know or stuff to blow your mind, stuff like that, which is a bit light reading or light hearing. Yeah, there's the one from NPR, which I think is good. It's called Consider This.
But Consider This, is it on design or not?
It's not specifically on design. Apart from that, I use the train a lot, so I read a lot of books. Some of them I have to. Actually, I have a recommendation. Actually, I read a book from Catalan, which was really good. But I read a book from one of my instructors. I used to work a bit at the RCA, the Royal College of Art, and one of my supervisors, Jeremy Meyerson, wrote a really, really good book. It's called Unworking, and it's on the history and design of the office, which I'm sure that everyone will find something interesting. It's written marvelously, and it's a really good book.
And tell me, what would you recommend to the Jonathan that just left university and started his first steps in the design business?
Okay, so first of all, I would recommend people to have an MA at some point. Usually, I recommend students to work a bit and gather experience, and then come back and broaden their scale at university. But I would say that you should consider your aims. What kind of thing do you want to do? What's your impact on the field? I mentioned before that saying to oneself, I want to make a lot of money, that's great if you can, but just think of other options. If you want to help people, then that's I think it's a great option. If you want to do something more intellectual, or the moment that you say your goals or outline what you want to do, because design sounds so big and vague that people will just wander and look for opportunities. But I think you should actually think about what your impact should be, and I think on things that AI cannot do and do that. So that's my main thought for the future.
Perfect. Thank you a lot for the interview. We recorded this interview just a couple of days after the horrible earthquake in Turkey, so it was natural to talk about the involvement of designers in rescue services. According to Jonathan, designers know how to translate data into models that can support tactics for rescue. In previous episodes, we have talked about rescue and emergency-related activities and the contributions from designers. In episode 84, Maria Mater O'Neill from Puerto Rico was telling us how designers responded to Hurricane Maria. She has been working with design students to give responses to the complex situation in 2020. In episode 261, I interview Andrés González dos Santos, who worked with forest fires. He has done his master thesis in design in relation to this. In episode 359, Nicolás García Mayor was telling us about spaces for hospital in emergency situations. At the moment of the interview, he was delivering these modules that could be used as hospital to Ukraine, to use in the war. As apparently I have done many interviews in which we have discussed design in the context of emergencies, I might have to create a list. Here is a short summary that I hope is useful for you. Sometimes I do these connections in order to better understand the content of my podcast. This is a topic that is worthy to explore more, so if you know designers working in relation to services or products for emergencies, let me know. You can always contact me and let me know who you have recommend or you want to recommend, especially if it is in connection with these themes that came up in our podcasts. As always, the music of this podcast is by Antonio Zimmerman. Sound design is by Julian Pereira. This podcast is published with Creative Commons license with attributions. This is Diseño y Diáspora. You can follow us in our social media channels in YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter, or visit our website. Remember to recommend us and recommend our books. Let's listen to the next one.